And while Monique connects, just a reminder to put yourselves on mute. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking time out from your day. Today, my name is Monique Navarro, and I'm the education specialist at Channel Islands National Park. So I'm not too far from you, and a lot of you probably have visited our headquarters. I'm in our distance learning studio right now at our mainland headquarters, where our visitor center is, and you may have been out to the islands. So I start every program with this patch, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's pretty important because it emphasizes the promise that the National Park Service has made to all of us, to the American public. And, you know, with younger kids, I would ask them, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you observe? So I know you've seen this. We won't go through that right now. And I usually do it to, do a sound check when we have like 40, 50 kids. But we know that the bison represents the animals that the National Park Service protects. The tree, this sequoia tree, represents the plants, the flowers, the trees, all of the green things that the National Park Service protects. The mountain represents the wild landscapes, be they deserts, be they mountains, prairies that we protect. The lake represents the rivers, the streams, the oceans, the waters. And then the shape of this, the arrowhead, is important. It represents the culture and the history and the stories that we tell, that we protect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. The story of a woman who lived alone on a Channel Island for 18 years. And that story is told in this book you may have read or heard of, your children or grandchildren may have read, but Island of the Blue Dolphins is arguably one of the most popular children's fiction novels really in the nation or in the world. It's still taught at the 4th and 5th grade level throughout California and the nation. It's our most popular distance learning program. So I've adapted this today to this audience. I will be asking some questions just to get input. You can use the chat or unmute yourself, but we will save questions related to this program till the end of it. I have about 17 slides, so I'm hoping that we won't have more than like 30, 35 minutes of content. Okay, so where did this story take place and where are the Channel Islands? You probably know where the Channel Islands are, right? But there's 8 Channel Islands, and some people don't know this. There are 8 Channel Islands. 5 of them are in the national park. The 5 in the national park are Santa Barbara, Anacapa, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, and San Miguel. I'm here in Ventura. Some of you may be here, a little more inland. These 3 islands are considered Channel Islands: Catalina, San Clemente, and San Nicolas Island. These 2 are owned by the Navy. As you know, Catalina is private, conservancy. It's kind of a blend, but there's populations that live here, a couple developments, so you may have visited. So this is the furthest island from the coast. It's over 60 miles off the coast, and this is where this story took place. And this is where we know that there was a woman who lived alone for 18 years, from 1835 to 1853. So we're going to dive in a little deeper to that story, and also to some more recent archaeological discoveries that were made in 2009 that give us some clues about what life may have been like on San Nicolas Island. And even though we can't visit this island, and maybe some of you have with organizations like CIR, Channel Islands Restoration, you can get out there doing some plant restoration work. I haven't visited yet. I hope to one day. But there's a lot of similarities in the ecosystems, the plants, the animals from the Southern Channel Islands and the Northern Channel Islands. I'm going to show you a little clip. I'm going to zoom in right now from our park film. You may have seen this, but just to kind of orientate you of where we are going to be virtually going today. You know, off the coast of Southern California, we have millions of people. We have the Santa Monica Mountains, 8 Channel Islands. That's San Nicolas Island right there. And they're a great place to find solitude, to find quiet. Beautiful views. It's Inspiration Point on Anacapa Island. The Kelp Forest is an important habitat for around 1,000 species of plants or algae, and animals. And so the kelp forest is pretty important, and the ocean was really important to survival on the Channel Islands. So What is that? What does this island look like? And what might it have been like to live there? There's a setting. Can I just get like maybe in the chat or use the reactions, a thumbs up? How many of you have read this book or have heard of this story? All right, I see a couple of thumbs up and a yes. All right, you've heard, but not read. Nope, heard of it. Okay. So a lot of you have heard of it, but maybe you haven't read it. This is a fun book to read when you're on the islands or even camping anywhere. So I'll just give it a plug right there. And so if you've read the book or you want to read the book, this place, this is an actual image of Coral Harbor on San Nicolas Island, is a really important to the story. It's an important setting. There was a lot that happened here. And I won't give it away, but there is a major conflict that happens, which is probably not surprising to those of you who are familiar with California history. There was definitely conflict and culture clash between the island people, and so they were referred to as Nicoleño, but mostly they self-refer as Tongva. And I know that you are very familiar with Tongva because they inhabited and continue to inhabit all of Los Angeles and the Southern Channel Islands. The Northern Channel Islands are the homeland of the Chumash. So right now you're probably on Chumash and or Tongva homeland. I just want to give that territorial acknowledgement right now. And so what occurred in the 1800s was there was a lot of hunting that was happening around the Channel Islands. Does anybody know? You can unmute yourself and put in the chat. There was a sea mammal, a marine mammal that was really popular and that was hunted to extirpation, meaning it still lives in other areas, but it no longer lives in our area. Yes, Jim, the sea otter. And the sea otter has some of the thickest fur in the animal kingdom. And so there were Russian, there were Aleut, there were boats that were coming and down the coast, right, and hunting there, but they also were hunting around the Channel Islands. We no longer have sea otters. It is a little more complex than that. I won't dive in, maybe if we have time after, but we don't really see them. I've heard of sea otters being seen in San Diego. I've heard of like just single ones or a couple in Goleta, like, and then more towards Point Conception, but Central Northern California do have more sea otters. They're not common and we don't see them around the Channel Islands. That's actually really important. That's another program, a conversation for another day, but they are considered a keystone species in the kelp forest ecosystem. And so there's a lot of cascading effects that are happening right now you may have read about, but if you're interested, just Google that, what's happening to kelp forests in Northern California, to bull kelp forests mostly. So we do know, based on historical evidence and stories, that there was a battle that happened right here. And there's an account, and of course, this is a book is historical fiction. There's an account of that in this book. So that's something I talk to about students who are reading this book. They're like, did that really happen? Yeah, it actually did really happen. And many of the native inhabitants of the island were killed and then removed, taken forcibly from from the island to missions and scattered throughout missions in California. And just remember that that's important as we kind of dive deeper into this story. So she writes about, well, the narrator of the protagonist of the story, Karana. I'll refer to her as the lone woman, but that's the name that Scott Odell gave her in this book. Sometimes you see her referred to as Juana Maria. That was her baptized name shortly before her death. She's buried at the Santa Barbara Mission, but just out of respect, we actually don't know what her name was. I will refer to her as the lone woman. So in this story, though, it talks about this battle that happens, and she witnesses her father. We don't know if it was her father, but many of the men being killed in this battle, and then many of the people being removed, and she stayed behind. And people want to know, is that true? So in the story, the account is that she was on a boat, and as they were pretty close to the island still, she jumped off and swam back to shore. And that is actually the historical account written by people who were on that boat. Basically, I'll send an archive. There's an Island of the Blue Dolphins archive that has a lot of primary and secondary sources. The account is that she did jump off the boat and swim back to shore. And the belief was that her son or her brother was still on the island. And the historical accounts do also say that she did have a son that was left behind. When she was discovered, well, not discovered, that's the wrong word, but when she did leave the island or was removed from the island in 1853, she was alone. So somebody was with her, and very likely that did not survive. And there's more about that in the story. I don't want to give the whole story away. It's a fun one to read. And one thing I'll say, there is a second book you may not know. It's called Zia, and it's written about one of her descendants, and that Zia is talking about her experience living in the mission system. It's a really interesting book, and it gives you a different perspective from really what the dominant kind of storyline or curriculum oftentimes teaches. So we'll move on. I don't need to give you the entire plot line of that story. I would love for you to read it. And so something that kind of helps us in how we find out, and I've already referenced that, is find out about what the lone woman's life may have been like as historical accounts. We will also look at things that are found on this island exactly, archeological discoveries. We're going to talk more about that. But we have a website too, an Island Blue Dolphins website that was created by the education coordinator who worked before me, Carol Peterson, and it has a lot of information and images. And this is an image that I do like to share with people when we're talking about Island Blue Dolphins. This is, of course, somebody's imagination. I'll zoom in a little bit here of what life may have looked like in that exact same spot at Coral Cove. But there's a lot of details here. I'll give you about half a minute to look at that. A lot of details here that communicate to us what that meeting may have looked like. This is supposed to be a depiction of that initial meeting, but also what resources and what survival was like on San Nicolas Island. And so you can see baskets, and you can see this is supposed to be a pile of sea otter furs. And that is what that battle apparently was about, was sea otters being overhunted. And Tongva on the island were, of course, not happy about that. They had lived sustainably for thousands of years. We know that there have been humans on the Channel Islands for nearly 13,000 years. Some of the oldest human remains in North America have been found on Santa Rosa Island. We know that there have been humans there for a very, very long time living on the islands. And recent research has revealed that humans did not only migrate over land, we also did migrate by sea. And there's something called the Kelp Highway that goes down the west coast, and the Channel Islands are very likely a part of that human migration. So here we have a hut that's made out of whale bones. Whale bones were used for fishing nets as well, for structures. These boats right here are similar to boats that you may have seen called tamols that the Chumash make. These boats in the Tonga language are referred to as tiats. And so these boats were made out of mostly redwood that would wash up on shore, and asphaltum or tar was used to keep them together. And that is how humans navigated around the Channel Islands, between the mainland and the islands. So this gives us a little idea of possibly what it may have looked like, but all of the details, I love the details of all of the items. Here's a mortar and pestle or pilon, all of the things, and you're familiar with this in the Santa Monica Mountains too as well, that humans and the creativity and the ingenuity and the engineering that humans had to have to survive. And if you've ever been on a boat, you've been to the islands, you've been camping, we take so many things for granted. And that's something I really try to especially instill when I'm talking to youth, is the intelligence and the creativity that had to go into surviving in these environments was something that most of us in modern days do not maintain. And it's important to note, though, that Chumash, and there are Chumash and Tongva who do still know how to make these boats. And there is somewhere in Los Angeles, I don't exactly know where, there is a yacht that's been built and on display. And there are several tamols that I have seen, and every year we have a tamol crossing. And Chumash, it's a homecoming for them. They will spend hours and hours. They'll leave at like 1 or 2 in the morning when it's still dark, going from the mainland to Limu or Santa Cruz Island. And I've been able to witness that a couple times. It's a pretty amazing event. So that's also saying that we don't maintain, or we don't know how to do that. Yes, Chumash, Tongva, many of them do still know how to do that and have maintained those traditions, and the seafaring knowledge that it requires to be able to navigate the islands. So we're going to look for some more clues about what it may have been like on San Nicolas Island. Like I said, this is a remote island. It's 61 miles off the coast of Southern California. And so we're filling in the missing pieces with archaeology. And that includes artifacts that we've found, structures, and documents that humans have left behind. So historians are a part of this story. Archaeologists are a part of this story. And there was a really amazing scientific discovery that I want to share with you. That's what we're going to be diving in deeper to today. So let's investigate. So most discoveries that archaeologists find are hidden, but some of them are on the surface. And I'm going to share this image with you because the boat captain, Captain George Nidever, he has written a book. It's called The Logs of Captain George Nidever. He lived in Santa Barbara. And his account is that he approached the lone woman on the island. This was in 1853, and she willingly left the island with him. We'll never really know if that's true, but one thing I do want to say is that it's not like people didn't know that she was on the island. So I'll send an archive and you can dig in deeper, but there were newspaper articles about this in the LA Times. There were newspaper articles about this in the Boston Globe. So around the country, people knew there was a woman living alone on this island. It wasn't like nobody was landing on the island or there weren't boats going around the island. So that's another part of the mystery. She knew this island really well, right? She knew the island really well and knew how to get around. In the story, in the novel, it talks about her hiding in a cave when she saw people coming to the island and then interacting with somebody. And so we'll talk more about that, but there are multiple village sites and other shelters that she very likely, were hers. This is a reconstruction. Like I said, Captain George Nidever said he found her in a whalebone hut. I'm pretty sure the whalebone huts that the lone woman and her people made were more secure, better than this, but this was a reconstruction by the Los Angeles Museum in 1939, 1941. They were doing a survey on San Nicolas Island, and so they tried to reconstruct a whalebone hut. We do know that there still are no trees. There's more shrubs on the island. And so whalebones were used to make shelters and structures. Also, archaeologists sometimes have heard about and believe that there are things, and they will spend a long time looking for them. And so this archaeologist, he's now retired, but Steve Schwartz worked for the Navy, and he spent 20 years trying to find a cave on the island that he believed was one of the shelters of the lone woman. And he did geological surveys, he would consult maps. He hiked around the island and he still could not find this map. And finally, 20 years later, he finally found a map at a library at UC Berkeley. And this map actually told him the location of this cave. He was very persistent, right? He did not give up. And so he believed, like I said, that this was one of the shelters of the lone woman. And They did begin excavation of this. They didn't find any artifacts or things in there because there were disputes about who who claimed the land on San Nicolas Island. So unfortunately, and I have talked to Steve Schwartz about this, the Navy did stop that excavation. So we did find the cave, but whether there are, items or artifacts in there, we don't know. We may never know. I also want to talk about and give recognition to the archaeological work that is happening now on the Channel Islands. And so our park archaeologist right now, this is her, Kristen Hoppe, and I got to join them on the islands a few weeks ago. And so she engages in a lot of difficult field work. We got to use this auger. We were trying to determine this site to see, this is Cajas Prisoners. Cajas is the Chumash name. This is Prisoners Harbor. What was located here, and if there were middens, and we did find evidence of many midden sites. And so essentially, we would take the dirt and put it into these augers, dump that into the buckets, and then sift that here. And here, of course, she's recording what we're finding, the condition, the color, the texture of the dirt, and what items we found. And when we engage in that work, it's really important to know that archaeologists are not working in isolation. They are not working alone. They are cooperating and working closely with tribal partners. And that's a requirement by law, but it's also really important because we are on their homeland and we need to be respectful of what's being located. And if we find something, it doesn't mean that we're always going to take and extract it. It may be more appropriate to leave it in place. If we've never seen this thing, the item that we have found, then we will, study it to learn more about it. But here's Julie Tumamite Stensley, and she is a Chumash elder, and she's here, and she is sifting the dirt that Kristen was getting out of the land, the earth there at Prisoners Harbor. So we talked about some different ways that archaeologists find things. I want to talk now about the last thing, the last discovery on San Nicolas Island. And so this archaeologist, John Erlinson, he works at the University of Oregon, and Dr. Renee Volanowith at CSU Los Angeles were hiking in the fall of 2009 around on their last day there on San Nicolas Island. And Dr. Volanowith went up kind of a gully, a valley, and Dr. Erlinson was hiking along a cliff. And there's a video I'll send you after. And Dr. Volanowith said that he saw, this is Renee, this is John. It's easier to call them by their first names. Just kind of stopped and was like, had this smile on his face and was like, come over here. And he pointed down and he saw this whalebone, which he thought, oh, this is a fossil, right? And as he got closer, he realized there's more than just a fossil here. This is an abalone shell, and this is something sticking out. This was in the fall before we hopefully get rains, and they knew that what was there had to be excavated immediately because it would easily go into the ocean due to erosion, right? This was an area where a lot of water, when it rains, will erode into the ocean. So what do you think that they found? Anyone heard about this? Anyone want to share in the chat or unmute yourself? What do you think that they found here on this cliff? This is fall of 2009 on San Nicolas Island. Maybe they found a tusk. Any other ideas? Oh, right. Well, that's why you're here, to learn about it, right? So this was an accidental discovery. And this is what Dr. John Erlinson found sticking out of the side of a cliff. So I'll let you look at that a little more closely. Now, what do you think that some of these items might be now looking at this? Any ideas what they are, what they could have been used for? Anne says she sees a box. You could really clearly see this box, right? And there's things in there. And so this was somebody's cache. This was somebody's secret hiding place. And there were actually 2 redwood boxes. This is the other one that were just sticking out of the side of the cliff, which pretty amazing. If that hadn't been found that fall, it very likely would have ended up in the ocean. There's a lot of artifacts and items that have ended up in the ocean. Underwater archaeology is really important, especially around the islands as well, but we may never have found them. So this cache was a collection of items and artifacts stored in a hidden place, and it was somebody's survival toolkit. And so the question is, could this redwood cache have belonged to the lone woman? So the items are from when she was on the island, so it's very possible. We'll never be able to prove it, but Dr. Erlinson, Dr. Volanowith strongly believe, that is their theory, that it did belong to her. So what then they did, of course, was they actually had to do it pretty quickly because they had 24 hours left on the island. They had to change all their plans and excavate and remove these redwood boxes carefully and bring them back to the mainland. So they worked at a lab at CSU Los Angeles and started to remove some of that dirt and sand. And you can start to see now what was in this cache, this box, right? What are some of the items that you notice here? What are some of the uses you think of some of these tools that were in this box? What do you think you could have used some of these things for if you were living alone on an island? Maybe a bone needle. There's definitely bones in here. Digging, cooking, abalone shells, food consumption, fish hooks. Yeah, this actually is a fish hook right here. Cutting and scraping meat tissue and fat from fish, abalone. So we'll talk a little bit more after our next slide about abalone, really important resource for surviving on the Channel Islands and on the coast. So what was in this box once it was cleaned up? It looks like there's a few items in there. There were a lot of things in that box. I'll zoom in there. So now what are some of the things that you notice or see here? Or what do you think some of these things could have been used for? Arrowheads, spear points, earrings for cutting and killing, knife. Every time I look at this image, I'm just always amazed, number one. And in this book, it also talks about, in the novel, it talks about her struggle with deciding to make tools. I don't know if this was true. I need to do more research on it. But something that especially young girls who are reading this book identify with in the story, once she's alone, she struggles with the decision to need to make tools. She has to make tools to survive, but it is the men who make the tools. And there's kind of this taboo against females making tools. And so it's a great discussion to have with kids especially, but so she makes that decision to do that. Whether that she actually had made that decision, if it was taboo or not, I'm not sure. I don't think we know exactly, but we do know that she had to have made tools to survive. And these could have been her actual tools here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these. We have arrowheads and spear tips here that are actually made from glass. And this glass was something that was either found or washed ashore or traded. This isn't glass that was actually produced, of course, on San Nicolas Island. And you see them also made from stone. So there's this innovation with using new materials to make tools. There are some buttons here. These look like earrings, yes, but these are abalone fish hooks. Buttons and other materials with little holes for ornamentation. All of these things, ornamentation made of bone, flutes made of bone, tools, weapons. These items here are really interesting, and Dr. Erlinson had done a lot of studying all along the coast, all the way up to Alaska. This design and this material actually comes from the Aleuts in present-day Alaska. So he was really excited when he found this, because this is another clue that told him that these items were from that time period, the 1800s. Were either traded, were either found, we're not sure exactly, but this represents a lot of that cultural interchange that was happening on San Nicolas Island, the Channel Islands, and all of California during this time period. Here's some flat stones for grinding, some marine mammal teeth from dolphins, and all these shells. And these shells here at the very bottom, these abalone shells, have black right there, and that's actually tar. We do know that tar was used to plug up the holes in abalone, because tar or asphaltum is naturally occurring here. And abalone, which there are certain species that are endangered now. We have a lot of different colors of abalone though: red, white, green, pink, black. This shell, not only would you eat the meat inside of it, but you could use this for many things, right? Like we've looked at the fish hooks. You can make jewelry, you can make ornamentation, and there's lots of different sizes. I actually wore these intentionally for you. I have tiny little abalone earrings, right? So you can use abalone as jewelry as well, ornamentation. Here's a whole kind of set I like to show audiences, because it shows you could have, had a whole set depending on the age, the size of the abalone, use them for different things. Here's this white abalone right there inside. So just a beautiful shell, and some of you may have seen some of these. There's a fun activity that Santa Monica Mountains does. I actually have one at home where you have little abalone shells, and you actually make an ornamentation, a little necklace. And I still have mine at home. I've done that at one of your events. So there's another box. It didn't have as many things in it. This actually, I forgot to talk about these stone, but this is a little stone effigy, and this was one of the first things that Dr. John Erlinson found. He realized quickly when he saw that. And then also a copper button. I'm not sure which one, but one of these buttons is copper. He knew immediately. He's like, this is not an animal fossil. This is, these are artifacts. So any other questions, comments, or anything about all of these things that were in this redwood cache? I see someone, Sonia asked, is it possible that our people who left San Nicolas Island left behind some of their tools? Yeah, it is really possible. There are, I don't know the exact names or locations. There's a lot more on an Island Blue Dolphin subject site, but there were village sites and tools and things that were left behind on the island. This was, in his career, and likely on the island, the largest archaeological discovery, though, that had been found up to date. Other questions, comments about all of these items in this redwood box? So the small bones, I'm not sure what these small bones were used for. Maybe somebody in the audience knows better. I imagine that they could have been used, for many different things, for tools. You could scrape out, meat from abalone or fish. Why would she have needed varying size of abalone? Well, I imagine that, you know, this is almost like, just like we have a Tupperware set at home. This is what I tell students. This is a set, right? It's a lot prettier than what we use, right? Whether it be glass or plastic. But maybe you are just going to, you know, go get some seeds, or collect other things, and you just need a small little container. But maybe you need a bigger size. Once you've plugged this up with asphaltum, you want to scoop up some water, right? Or maybe you're really hungry, so your breakfast is going to be bigger. You're going to eat out of this. So I think there's a lot of different uses, just like we use different size bowls for when we're cooking or when we're eating or preparing food. Similarly, there were different sizes that were used. Whoops, one just dropped, for different things. And if you were going to make a fish hook or an ornament, it was probably easier to work with a smaller, right? It may not be as strong though, so that might have been an issue, but it probably was easier to work with a smaller abalone with this natural curve here to make, let me show you, I have one right here, to make a fish hook. This is an actual abalone fish hook right here. Easier to work with a smaller abalone. And this was made, see, they're the same color there. Something that size versus a big one, the biggest one I have, something this size. Good question. I see one more here in the chat. Would the railroad boxes have been made on the island, or might they have been left by the people who came there and attacked the Chumash people? So I just want to clarify that the Southern Channel Islands are the homeland of Tongva people. And I don't believe that they had the skills or the capacity to work with redwood. Redwood was used to make the traditional plank canoes or tiots. And so they were very familiar with this material and making items out of it. So that's one of the reasons we believe and are pretty sure that this belonged to the Lone Woman's people, Tongva. And were the cache boxes near the cave? They weren't near the cave. I don't know exactly where they were in location, but there's a great interactive map where you could find that on that Island Blue Dolphin subject site that I will send as a follow-up. And these items, like I said, are from, they are less than, most of them are less than 200 years old, but they are from the 1800s, from that time period when she was on the island, 1835 to 1853. So I will have time for a few more questions at the end, but I do have a question for you. If you were hiking around the Santa Monica Mountains or the Channel Islands or anywhere really, and you stopped to take a drink of water and you look down and you saw this sticking out of the dirt, what do you think you should do? What do you think you should do? Call a ranger, right? Report it to a ranger. Of course, this audience will give that response. Take a picture and contact after you've taken GPS. Yes, geotag it. Very good. So even I wouldn't pick it up or move it. And we would report that to an archaeologist, because if this item was removed or taken home, because kids oftentimes say, I would take it home, or I would pick it up and turn it in. If this item is like a word in a book, one word like from this book, and if it's removed, there's so many clues around here. There's probably more artifacts there. The rocks, all of that gives us ideas and helps us build this story of how old those items are. So you don't want to move it. One thing that's important to note, that if you believe you have found human remains, it's really disrespectful to take a picture of those. So you would not want to take a picture of that. You wouldn't want anyone to take a picture of your ancestors' remains. And so noting your location is important, and then reporting that immediately. But if it's an item, an artifact, that's fine. You don't want to announce that on social media, right? Of course not. But if it's human remains, you do not want to take a photo of that. So this is the reason that we have national parks, to protect, we talked at the beginning, the plants, the animals, the culture, the artifacts, the history, so we can learn more about them. So we can visit other Channel Islands. This is a photo I took just a few weeks ago from the Santa Rosa Island campground, looking out at Santa Cruz Island, a beautiful spring day. We can visit the northern Channel Islands, and Santa Barbara Island is a southern Channel Island, to give us an idea of what it may have been like to live on the Channel Islands, what it possibly was like for the lone woman, and we can learn more about her people, the Tongva, today. All right, that's all I have. So are there any questions about this book, about Channel Islands National Park? Oh, what did happen to Karana's cormorant feather cape? Great question. So allegedly, she did have, there was written evidence by Captain George Nidover that she had. In the book, it talks about a cormorant feather dress or skirt. And she did have one. That is what he said. Actually, a historian actually tried to track that down, because it ended up with the Santa Barbara mission, and it led, when she was doing research, it led all the way to the Vatican, and she did visit the Vatican in Rome to try to locate that cormorant skirt, but couldn't find it. If you've ever been to the Vatican, it's a pretty big place, right? They got lots of stuff. So unfortunately, nobody knows where it is, but it's supposedly there. Yeah, I can post that website, the Island Blue Dolphins website. This is the website is the National Park Service site, and it has a lot of great stuff for students, for teachers, but it also has an entire archive. Oh, thanks so much, Lay. An entire archive of primary and secondary sources related to this story. Why does she decide to leave the island? Like, that's kind of that's not something that we'll ever be able to answer. You know, Captain George Nidover said that she came with him willingly. Did she? Was she removed forcibly? You know, we will never really know the answer to that. When did the Navy take control of the island? So the island, San Nicolas Island, is still owned by the Navy, but these islands were here and here were used for military defense and continue to be used for military practice and defense during World War II. I can't tell you the exact year. So 3 of those islands, San Nicolas or San Miguel, we lease that from the Navy, but San Nicolas and San Clemente are still owned by the Navy, and there is a Navy site up at on Santa Cruz Island as well. Did the Native Americans use fire on San Nicolas Island? So we do know that fire was used as a form of, and you probably know more about this Santa Monica Mountains, but we do know that our relationship with fire now has changed, but it wasn't, it was used at times to clear certain areas. Whether that was used on that island specifically, I can't say, but there are certain plants like oak that, and other plants that actually need fire at times. And in our management of it, we have suppressed it for a really, really long time. And now we're starting to rethink the way that we manage it. And I'm pretty sure that one of the biggest fires was in 1988 or 87 in Yellowstone National Park. Was a huge fire. I remember that really vividly because my parents decided to take us camping there when I was a kid, and we ended up at Yellowstone National Park when it was on fire. I was too young to be afraid, and there were wildlife going everywhere. It was like this seminal wildlife experience for me as a child. But if you read about that, that is when the Forest Service and other agencies realized, you know, if we continue to suppress this fire, it will, burn and burn when they happen, as we unfortunately know all too well here where we live. We've had a lot of fires here recently. We've had a couple fires on Santa Cruz Island in the past few years. There was one that just happened recently, and it just burned down to the coast right there on this peninsula. But now we have native plants coming back, but we do unfortunately have invasive plants coming back as well. Okay, I see a question here about the lone woman. Do they know how old the lone woman was when she left? Not exactly how old she was. In the book, though, she's pretty young. She's kind of like portrayed as like teens or 20s, but she was actually older than that. She was a woman. Like exactly how old she was, we're not sure. Likely probably in her 30s or 40s. She did not live very long when she came to the mainland. And so there's different stories about that, but that basically, her diet changed. She was eating food from the island. And so when she came to Santa Barbara, she lived with Captain George Nidover, his wife and children. To his credit, there were people who came to him who said, oh, we want to take her traveling and kind of use her as like a sideshow, and he refused to do that because unfortunately that was a practice that was done during that time period in the 1800s. And so she was there with him and his family, but her diet changed. And so after a few weeks, it was about 6 to 8 weeks, she did end up passing of dysentery. And she was baptized at the Santa Barbara Mission and given the name Juana Maria. That's why sometimes people refer to her as Juana Maria. But you can visit her grave at the Santa Barbara Mission. Which that always just makes me sad because she survived for so long alone on that island, and then she came to the mainland and then didn't live for a very long time. Other questions?
Do you see the one where she ever reunited with some of the others?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So there were people who were working to try to communicate with her and to find people who could communicate with her, but unfortunately, her people were spread and dispersed throughout many different missions throughout California. And there is some new research that's coming out. The research that's been done up until this point says that nobody was able to communicate with her. But Susan Morris, and there's more about her on the website, and Steve Schwartz, the archaeologist, Susan Morris is a historian, have been doing more research and digging into some archives to see if there was somebody who could communicate with her. She doesn't have any descendants directly that we know of. She did, we believe, was with a son on the island, but when she was found, he was no longer there. But she would, of course, have had family or relatives that did survive on the mainland missions. In the book, the other book that Scott Odell wrote, remember, was historical fiction, was about, one of her descendants, but that's a story that Scott Odell wrote really to communicate the experience of Native peoples at the missions. Are there any other questions? Well, I appreciate you showing up and being willing to listen and learn more about this. You can always come to our visitor center in the Ventura Harbor. We are open again, with modifications. The islands are open, but we are open every day from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you're here, you don't see me, just ask for Ranger Monica. I can come out and show you some of these artifacts. We'll probably have to look at them from a distance, but we can still look at them together.
Well, I had one last question. Any idea why the Navy stopped the excavation of that cave?
It's pretty controversial. I'm not an expert to speak to that. But all I do know is that there was another tribe that claimed and traced their ancestry back to San Nicolas Island. And so there was a dispute between two tribes about that island, or claiming that as their homeland. And so the Navy stopped it. That's all I know. I'm sure you could find more research about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, so does any local or MPS museum have artifacts from her? So I do know that those boxes, those redwood caches, like Carol Peterson, my predecessor, did get to go to San Nicolas Island and see them, but they're still at San Nicolas Island, like in some vault. So, I mean, it'd be really cool if that was on a display, right? So some of us could see that, but because they're part of that dispute, yeah, they're kept there. So they're not accessible to the public, unfortunately.
Wow.
I have talked to like one teacher who was related to, I think, or married to somebody who worked on the island. They did get a chance to see them. They said it was pretty amazing. But we can continue, right, to honor her memory by reading the book, by talking, by learning more, going to the website. And if you have kids at home or grandkids at home who are super zoomed out, like all of us are, have them pick up a book. It's a really great book to read. And it's a really great empowering story too for young girls, because so many survival stories are about boys. This is one about a female, so it's pretty cool.
Well, one last question.
True. Oh, go ahead.
The title, Island of the Blue Dolphin, any idea where that came from?
Yeah, there's a few different theories. Like sometimes students be like, or say, "Oh, this looks like a dolphin." I haven't dug into that. I'm pretty sure that's just a name that he came up with because it's like a beautiful name. But I mean, there's lots of dolphins. I know in the Santa Barbara Channel now, because I was just on a boat a couple of days ago, the population of common dolphins is about 25,000. And we saw like a couple super pods. So we were seeing thousands of dolphins at the same time. But if you can imagine the 1800s, like how many dolphins actually were living here, that likely has something to do with it. There were probably way more. Well, thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Could I just add one thing?
Yeah.
This story is really similar to the story about Ishi, the last Yahi, who was a man that was the last of his people in the early 1900s up above Sacramento. Has anyone heard that story?
Yeah, Ishi, last of his tribe.
Yeah, this is so, when you were saying all this stuff, I kept thinking about, I taught a class on Ishi, and just recently, the anthropologist, the head of the anthropology department at UC Berkeley that was named for he was named, it was the Dr. Kroeber building. They've taken it down because they've met a lot of resistance with the fact that they used him as a study, very similar to what was happening to the lone woman.
Yeah, she was, and that's one thing I have read about. I did read about what you're talking about, is that I do, want to mention that vernacular, or saying a lone woman or last of his tribe, contributes to that narrative that Native peoples no longer exist. And I think that was part of that. And so that's why I've struggled. I'm like, so should we call her Karana, or should we call her Juana Maria? Should we call her the lone woman? And so I think that that's really important, especially when we're thinking about this, or especially talking to kids and teaching kids about this, because I so often go into classrooms and there are, and my husband's a 5th grade teacher, students believe, and the way that we're taught throughout our culture is that, and it's shifting now finally, that, Native Americans are an artifact and they no longer live among us. And so there's this erasure of them as humans and as a culture. And I think that that's pretty important to make that connection and to honor that, and to also realize that we're telling their stories, but we really need to just start listening, right? And listen to their stories. That's a whole other conversation. We could have facilitated dialogue on that another day. But I think that was part of it, right? Because I think Ishi, I remember reading that book in 7th grade and actually like being really bored. And I'm a reader. I was an English teacher in high school for many years because that's how it was taught. My teacher taught it like, and I went to Catholic school, like, here's Ishi, like, he's dead. That doesn't exist anymore. If it had been presented in a way like, oh my gosh, like in a more dynamic, living, actual, authentic, real way, I think it'd be more engaging. And so there is some of that with this story that happens as well too, which I think is important and that we need to honor. Why I intentionally say Tongva instead of Nicoleño, because the Spanish refer to them as Nicoleño, but that's a Spanish name, right? So what was the Tongva name, which is, I need to learn now, what is the Tongva name of this island? Like those place names are really important for us to honor. So yeah, maybe shouldn't have opened up that can of worms at this time, but I think it's important. And I think it's part of our job as educators and interpreters for the Park Service of whose story are we telling and how we're communicating it.
I think it's really important. I think it's great, you know, saying what you said, because these people should be telling their stories, and they've been so marginalized and silenced, and they're out there and they're coming into the foreground now, thankfully. So anyway, thank you. I'll mute myself now.
You're welcome. Well, I know it's after 1 o'clock. Any closing words that you wanted to make, Lay?
I think we're not hearing her, but thank you. That's a good closing word. That was awesome. I know you do this a lot, so thanks for adapting it for adults and being so engaging.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you, Monique.